Good day everyone, I am Miss Arlene Montiliano Aragon and today I'll be continuing the discussion with regards to education theories. These are the proponents for the education theories. First, we have David Cobb. He is an American education theorist who proposed his four-stage of experiential learning theory in 1984. It is built on the premise that learning is the acquisition of abstract concepts which can be then applied to a range of scenarios. Cobb states that the learning involves the acquisition of abstract concepts that can be applied flexibly in a range of situations. In Cobb's theory, the impetus for the development of new concepts is provided by new experiences. This is Cobb's experiential learning cycle. First is the concrete experience. Here, the learner encounters a concrete experience. This might be a new experience or situation or reinterpretation of existing experience in the light of the new concepts. Next, we have reflective observation of the new experience. The learner here reflects on the new experience in the light of their existing knowledge. This presents the importance of any inconsistencies between experience and understanding. Third on the cycle is abstract conceptualization. This is a reflection that gives rise to the new idea or the modification of an existing abstract concept. Here, we can learn or we can know if the person has learned from their experience. And the fourth one is active experimentation. This is the newly created or modified concepts that gives a rise to the experimentation. The learner here applies the ideas to the world around them and see what happens. Kolb's experiential learning cycle is connected to each other. Each stage in the cycle both supports and leads to the next stage. Learning is achieved only if all four stages have been completed. However, a learner may travel around the cycle multiple times, further refining their understanding on the topic. No one stage is an effective learning strategy on its own. For example, if the reflective observation stage is skipped, the learner could continue make the same mistakes again. Kolb's experiential learning style theory is typically represented by four-stage learning cycle, in which the learner touches all the bases. Effective learning is seen when a person progresses through a cycle of four stages. First, having a concrete experience, followed by observation and reflection on that experience, which leads to the formation of abstract concepts or analysis and making generalizations or conclusions, which are then used to test hypotheses in the future situations, resulting to new experiences. Next is the Peter Principle, which was developed by an American educational theorist himself, Lawrence Peter, and was explained in the book The Peter Principle that Peter wrote with his colleague Raymond Hull. Originally, the book was supposed to be a statistical view of how people promoted in organizations, but it became popular as it actually made a valid point. Whilst not strictly as learning theory, it does not have some crossover to the classroom. The Peter Principle deals with four levels of competence. They could give a teacher planning a long-term teaching strategy, a framework to use when thinking about students' progress. First, we have unconscious incompetence. This is not knowing how to do a task without knowing that you don't know. The second one is conscious incompetence. Here, you still don't know how to do the task, but now you know that you don't know. You are aware of a gap in your knowledge. And third is conscious intelligence. Here, you can now do the task, but it requires a lot of concentration. And the fourth one is unconscious intelligence. You can now perform the task with ease, and this is achieved by repeated practice. The third theory is psychoanalytic theory. This is proposed by Sigmund Freud. Freud's psychoanalytic approach views child's development as being driven by psychological and largely sexual desires. He splits child's development into a series of stages. In each stage, a child needs to overcome challenges or else being stuck or fixated on the challenge throughout the rest of their lives might be at risk. These are the psychoanalytical stages of Sigmund Freud. First, we have oral stage. This is between 0 to 1 year old. Children focus on gaining pleasure through the mouth, such as eating and suckling. If children don't successfully win off their mother's teeth in the first year, Freud believes they will grow up with dependency issues. Next is anal stage. This is between 1 to 3 years. Children's pleasure center moves to anus as they being learned to control bowel movements. If parents are too strict or too lax in potty training, children may grow up to develop control issues. Third is phallic stage. This is between 3 to 6 years. Children develop a focus on their genitals and develop sexual attraction to the parent of the opposite sex. If they do not successfully navigate this stage, they may have mommy issues or daddy issues and develop a long-term sense of inferiority, vanity, and self-obsession. Next is latency stage. This is between 6 years to puberty. Children's sexual desires are suppressed as they focus on developing relationships with peers of the same sex. This is generally quiet stage. And the last stage is genital stage. This is from puberty until onwards. Adolescents develop sexual attraction to a non-family members of the opposite sex. If they manage to successfully navigate the parental issues in childhood, they should develop a healthy relationships in adulthood. In education, we tend to use Freud's theory to critique why and how students are behaving that way they do in our classrooms. An educator can use psychoanalysis to understand why students have control issues, dependency issues, or vanity issues. Behavioral theories do not focus on what happens within the mind of a neurological or developmental level. Instead, they focus on only observable behaviors. According to a behaviorist approach, nothing is learned unless there is a tangible behavioral change that can be seen, heard, or measured. First, we have classical conditioning. This was developed and proposed by Ivan Pavlov in early 1900s. The theory shows that we can learn to associate two things if we experience them as usually being proximal to one another. In other words, we associate one thing with another if they usually come as pair. Pavlov conducted a famous experiment on his dog to demonstrate that he could train his dog's brain. The experiment involved ringing a bell just before he gave dog a food. Before long, he realized that the dog would salivate in anticipation of food after the bell was rung, regardless of whether food or not food would arrive. This experiment showed that we could train our brains to unconsciously react to a stimulus. The dog's salivation was not an intentional behavior. Rather, it was a conscious reaction which showed that dog's brain had been hardwired to react in a certain way over time. John Watson showed that classical conditioning also works for humans. Watson managed to make children afraid of animals by associating animals with loud noises, and also made them less afraid of phobias by slowly de-associating the phobia with bad things. Next is operant conditioning. Operant conditioning builds on classical conditioning. While classical conditioning shows that some things are learned subconsciously, operant conditioning shows that the same principles can be used to consciously learning things. The famous operant conditioning theorist was B.F. Skinner, or Burrhus Frederick Skinner. He developed a contraption called a Skinner box. If Ivan Pavlov presents his theory on classical conditioning, with a dog, a bell, and a food, B.F. Skinner presents a box and a cat. The Skinner box was a contraption that trained cats to access a box of food by pressing a lever beside the box. At first, the cats didn't know how to get the food. They scratched around the box trying to find their way in, but eventually, they learned that the lever gives them access to the food. Eventually, the cats got smart enough that they just hit the lever at the wheel. The food used as positive reinforcement to train the cats. Skinner's experiment showed that we can learn to behave in certain ways if there is a positive reinforcement or punishment involved in the process. Like Pavlov, Skinner showed the power of association, positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement in learning. For Skinner, the association between a positive reinforcement or punishment and a certain outcome will allow teachers to sculpt a child's behavior. From a classroom management perspective, positive reinforcement is an essential strategy for teaching students how to act and conduct themselves. Positive reinforcement like praising or appreciating should be given for behaviors that are desirable. For example, verbally answering questions in a class. Initially, this should be done for all the answers given, regardless whether they are correct. This will build a culture of answering questions. As the behavior in question becomes commonplace, the teacher should then both reduce the frequency of reinforcement and, as in our example, only give it for correct answers. Ultimately, the teacher will reduce the frequency of positive reinforcement only to those responses of the highest caliber. This will create a culture of desired excellence in the students. Proceeding to humanist theory. Humanist theory was developed by American psychologist Carl Rogers in the 1980s. Facilitative learning is a humanistic approach to learning. Humanism was developed to contrast cognitism and behaviorism. Both Rogers and Maslow, based on their work in humanism, the key perspectives of humanism are as follows. First, people have a natural desire to learn in order to achieve self-actualization. Next, it is not the outcome that is important part of education. It is the process of learning itself. Third, the students themselves should be in control of their learning, and it should be achieved through observing and exploring. Next, the teacher should be an encouraging role model, motivating, guiding, supporting on their personal journey. Rogers proposed 3 additional core characteristics that a teacher should possess for facilitative learning. First is realness. The teacher should be themselves and use their own personality when teaching. Being real with the students breeds an ethos of trust between the students and the teacher. The teacher should be able to convey their feelings rather than being just monochromatic robot. Next is praising, accepting, and trusting. A teacher should care about their students and accept their feelings regardless of whether they assist or detract from learning. Through these characteristics, deeper trust and respect is built. And third is empathy. Understanding students' perception of learning and their feelings. The effectiveness of facilitative learning also requires certain traits to be present in the student. They should be motivated, aware of the facilitative conditions they have been provided with, and aware that the task they have been given is useful, realistic, and relevant. If all these characteristics are present, in the words of Rogers himself, learning becomes life, and a very vital life at that. The student is on his way, sometimes excitedly, sometimes reluctantly, to becoming a learning, changing behavior. Proceeding to Cantor's theory of assertive discipline. Assertive discipline is a structured system to enable teachers to manage their classrooms. It focuses on their teaching, developing a positive behavior management strategy rather than being dictatorial. This was proposed by Lee Cantor. Cantor's proposition is that the teacher has the right to decide what is best of their students, and that no student should prevent any other from learning. He presents these methods of assertive discipline. First is make the rules very clear, do not be ambiguous. Second, recognize when students behave correctly and be praised, and praise them. Third, be specific when praising students. Make sure they know why they are praised. Fourth, reward exceptional behavior. Fifth, be clear on the consequences of bad behavior. And sixth, always follow through the consequences of the rule breaking. The teacher should be very clear in setting boundaries as to how they expect their students to behave and work. The students should know what these boundaries are, and in any deviation should be met with an assertive action from the teacher. This all sounds quite draconian, right? However, if the teacher gives a firm, clear instruction and those instructions are met, they should follow by positive reinforcement. Any deviation from the instruction should be met with negative consequences that the students have prior knowledge of. And lastly, we have Draker's classroom management theory. Rodolph Draker proposed the theory that mutual respect should be the basis for discipline, and this mutual respect motivates learners to display positive behaviors. He believes that the students have innate desire to feel like an accepted member of a group and to feel like they have value and confidence to contribute to that group. Drakel called this desire to belong the genuine goal of social behavior. If the students are unable to achieve this goal, they start a series of goals of misbehavior. The resulting misbehavior is misguided by attempt at gaining the sense of belonging they are missing. Drakers presents 4 ways how to combat the 4 goals of misbehavior. First is gain attention. Ignore the attention seeking and use positive reinforcement when positive behavior is shown. Distract the students by offering alternate actions or choices. Example, please, could you hand out the books? Next is gain power and control. Focus on all the good behavior in the class while ignoring the attempt to gain power, or no account should be engaged in a battle of power. Bill Rogers, the behavior expert, called this block dot while square approach. Third is gain revenge. Remember that the student is trying to gain a sense of belonging, and this revenge seeking is masked attempt to gain it. Away from the other students, let the students know that you care about them and their education, that despite their actions, you want the best for them. And the fourth one is display feelings of inadequacy. At this stage, the student has given up on themselves. This stage will manifest the form of not doing. For example, not doing homework, not participating during the class encounter, and etc. Students at this stage should be shown how to recognize small successes and achievements. Showing an interest in them and their work will always help slowly bring out the student at this stage. Thank you everyone for spending time in listening and paying attention to the discussion made. I hope your learning from your previous class encounters were refreshed. These are the references where we got the informations made in our discussion today. Thank you so much and see you.